Why China is terrified of U.S. Air Force. The United States Air Force, or USAF, is the world's largest and most powerful air force. It has a far larger and more modern aircraft force than the Chinese Air Force, or PLAAF. The USAF has a global presence, whereas the PLAAF is solely concerned with protecting China's airspace. Because of these circumstances, China believes that the U.S. Air Force will have a significant edge in any battle between the two nations. As a result, in order to reduce the gap with the USAF, China has been spending extensively on its own Air Force. However, it will be several years before China's Air Force can compete with the U.S. Air Force in terms of strength, technology, and reach. The Chinese are well aware of the U.S. Air Force's advantages, and they are understandably terrified. The USAF is a major threat to China's security, and it is likely to remain so for many years to come. Now, we'll delve deep into it. The first reason China is terrified of the U.S. Air Force is that they are now outgunned and outnumbered. While this may come as a surprise given that China has around 4 times the population and an economy equivalent to the United States, this is due to both strategic mistakes taken by China that have harmed their total aviation capabilities and allowed the U.S. to attain numerical and technological dominance. China has achieved exponential breakthroughs in military technology across all spectrums of conflict during the last 20 years or more. However, the Chinese military, like its American counterparts, has funding restrictions. With a military budget that is generally 1/3 that of the United States, they must cut savings in a variety of areas. Unfortunately for the Chinese, they have a history of cutting costs with their Air Force, resulting in this large difference in both the quantity of combat aircraft and their capabilities. In terms of raw numbers, the U.S. Air Force alone possesses more aircraft than China's Air Force, Army, and Naval Air Force combined. The U.S. Air Force alone has somewhat more than 5,200 aircraft, with over 2,400 more on order for delivery in the future. That starkly contrasts with the roughly 3,300 aircraft the entire Chinese military can bring to the fight today. However, the United States has not only a significant numerical advantage, but also considerably better technology. 5th-generation aircraft, for example, is the gold standard of fighter technology for current air combat. 5th-gen fighter aircraft have advanced stealth technology and can defeat most, if not all, anti-aircraft radars, supercruise capabilities, secure and unbreakable communication suites, highly integrated computer and weapon systems, and strong airframes that are both flexible and light. The U.S. Air Force has 2 of these aircraft. The first of these is the F-22, which entered service in the early 2000s. Despite being very costly, many believe this capable and lethal aircraft to be the king of any modern dogfight. The F-35, a similar design, ultimately achieved full operational capability a few years ago, and the Air Force now has over 300 of these aircraft. With just under 200 F-22s in service, the U.S. Air Force is by far the world's largest 5th-generation fighter force, which is rising year after year. The Chinese Air Force similar fighter, the J-20, lags well below U.S. capabilities. While U.S. military officials have been pleasantly impressed by its maneuverability and the armament packages that the Chinese have installed on it, it is only slightly equivalent to the F-22 and does not come close to matching the capacity of the F-35. However, 5th-generation fighters are not the only aircraft that might engage in peer-to-peer conflict. While they are nonetheless excellent aircraft, they frequently lack the stealth technology and modern avionics seen in 5th-generation fighters such as the F-22 and F-35. Despite having somewhat less capacity than their 5th-generation younger siblings, 4th-generation fighters such as the F-15 and F-16 outperform their Chinese J-10, J-11, and J-16 equivalents. One of the key causes of this is the unavailability of jet engines. China has struggled to build and manufacture its aircraft engines at home. For decades, they have either purchased, attempted to reverse engineer, or outright stolen sophisticated engine designs. This is a major issue for China because of funding limits that prevent research and development, and because their culture discourages critical thinking. Despite its strong industrial base, China lacks an open economy that encourages profit-driven development as the U.S. does. As a result, China cannot develop the majority of its products for both civilian and military markets. Consider the straightforward ballpoint pen. You probably use one every day and don't think twice about it. While Americans in the United States may take this writing implement for granted, China faced significant challenges in producing it. For many years, China produced 80% of the world's ballpoint pens, but had to have all the ballpoints manufactured elsewhere and brought to China to be assembled. After tremendous popular demand and official interference, China was finally allowed to create its local ballpoint pen in 2017. So since China can't even make a pen, they surely can't make an aviation engine capable of making their jets more powerful than their US counterparts. This is abundantly demonstrated by China's woeful progress in designing, manufacturing, and fielding its jet engines. China has been unsuccessfully seeking to reverse engineer American aircraft engines since the late 1970s. Instead, they have mainly relied on nations like Russia to supply them with jet engines. This is best evidenced when the Chinese agreed with Russia to purchase several hundred Su-27 flanker aircraft because they had the best engines China could get their hands on at the time. After producing about 100 aircraft, the Chinese started making unlicensed copies that became the J-11. Because of this, Russia has been reluctant to sell China any more engines or aircraft, and as a result, progress has remained slow for the past 20 years in building comparable jet engines for its fighters like the US possesses. It was not until the last few years that China made progress with its first domestically produced engine, the WS-10. Despite being a great leap forward in jet engine technology, the WS-10 falls well below what US engines are capable of, especially because of its lack of supercruising abilities. In aerial combat, having the ability to supercruise is a game changer. This means that the aircraft can travel faster than the speed of sound. Historically, this has been accomplished through the use of afterburners, but these have their downsides. The biggest disadvantage is that the pilot can only fly at speeds greater than Mach 1 for a limited duration. With modern engine technology, such as that found in the F-22, fifth-generation fighters in the United States may operate at sustained supersonic speeds without the need for afterburners. Even China's most modern fighter, the J-20, is incapable of doing so. Furthermore, despite the fact that China has produced hundreds of these engines, their performance has been uneven at best. While they are undoubtedly good when they function, they are frequently broken. This is due to the WS-10 requiring maintenance up to 10 times more frequently than comparable systems in the United States. This means that Chinese fighters powered by this engine are out of battle more frequently than their American counterparts. But a lack of progress in creating reliable jet engines has not only hurt future developments, but has also caused their fourth-generation fighters to be at a disadvantage to their fourth-generation U.S. counterparts. As a general rule, the J-10 and J-11, depending on the variant, are heavier and slightly larger than the F-15 and F-16. While differing doctrinal opinions, such as the Chinese Air Force being used mainly as a ground support force rather than the air dominance arm, have played a factor, the main differences have come from having to compensate for their inferior engines. Chinese and Russian engines are less fuel efficient than those produced in the United States. As a result, if Chinese aircraft wish to improve their combat range or fly at faster speeds, they must carry more fuel. Because China has fallen behind in metallurgical technology for making lighter, stronger airframes, the aircraft must be larger to carry all of this excess weight. The larger the aircraft and the more fuel it carries, the fewer weapons it can carry, further undermining Chinese air power. As a result, despite great advances in Chinese avionics and weapon technology, both their fourth and fifth generation fighters remain outclassed by the U.S. Air Force, which can travel further, move faster, and hit harder than what the Chinese could ever hope to do right now. China has been rapidly growing its Air Force to try and beat the U.S. through raw numbers to compensate for inferior technology. As for the making of this video, China has about 1,300 fourth-generation and 200 fifth-generation fighters, a lot less than what the U.S. fields. But while China's fourth-generation efforts are rapidly catching up with the U.S. as the U.S. Air Force fields more F-35s, this gap in technological capability will only widen unless China rapidly produces many more fighters and better engines. Another critical factor that would enable Chinese fighters to gain air superiority is their armament. Chinese engineers have developed several extremely powerful weapons during the last decade. The PL-15 has been the most common and destructive of these for U.S. fighters. The PL-15, which entered service over 10 years ago, represented a significant advancement in Chinese air-to-air missile technology. Not only is it very fast, with theoretical speeds of up to Mach 4 and secure two-way data links between the firing units, but it also has a remarkable range, with Chinese sources suggesting a range of up to 300 kilometers. While this range may appear to be many a little out of reach, the United States Air Force considered the danger serious enough to begin work on a new missile. Their primary long-range air-to-air missile, the AIM-120 Advanced Medium-Range Air-to-Air Missile, or AMR-AAM, was suddenly outclassed. The U.S. planners immediately began to work on creating stopgaps to counter this threat that has been pressed into service while development continued on several new super long-range missiles. The first of these missiles was the AIM-120D, and U.S. engineers worked tirelessly to improve almost all aspects of the missile, including its motor, navigation system, communication suite, and jamming resistance. The ultimate result was a missile that was as rapid as the PL-15 but had almost double the range of standard AIM-120 missiles, around 160 kilometers. The United States also developed updated variants of its AIM-9X Sidewinder short-range air-to-air missile. While the missile has always been and continues to be a passive seeker, meaning it seeks out objects that radiate infrared radiation, the U.S. has engineered it to be a much more precise one. They accomplish this by developing a new targeting mechanism that is more precise than prior iterations. This is because the new AIM-9X can access a virtual library of infrared signatures and can latch onto smaller infrared signals than previously. Furthermore, pilots can launch the missile without initially looking on it, allowing Air Force pilots to attack and scatter rapidly to evade counterfire from Chinese planes. In addition to the present fighter-launched weapons, the U.S. is developing additional air-to-air missiles that will destroy Chinese planes and bombers long before they reach their targets. The AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missile and Long-Range Engagement Weapon are two of these missiles. Both of these weapons, developed independently by two American corporations, aim to tackle the same problem: how to reach out to the bad guy before he can reach out and touch American planes. With purported ranges of more than 200 kilometers and speeds up to Mach 5, these missiles would be faster and have a longer range than the primary Chinese air-to-air missiles. That means that U.S. fighters can shoot down Chinese fighters long before they could ever even attempt to get a shot off at the Americans. But it's not just fighters that have extended range weapons. The Air Force also has one that can reach out and destroy the Chinese bases from much greater distances. The AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, or the JASSM, is a technological wonder that has been in development for decades. The Air Force and Navy intended to establish their cruise missile programs during the Cold War, while the Navy's version evolved into the Tomahawk, which is still widely used today. The Air Force tried numerous different designs before settling on the present variant, which debuted in 2014. The JASSM is a long-range weapon that can be launched by most bombers and fighters. With a publicly disclosed range of 1,900 kilometers for the most recent models, this range is likely to be substantially larger in practice. While it travels below the speed of sound, this extreme range weapon allows American aircraft to fire on Chinese targets from a safe distance. In fact, with such extreme ranges, it allows the U.S. Air Force to strike Chinese ground targets without any fear of counterfire. This is because of China's antiquated air defense system, which relies more on mass than sophistication. Chinese air defenses were terrible by the turn of the century. Very few portions of the nation were covered at all, and the coverage that was provided came from a limited sample of antiquated Soviet hand-me-downs. As a result, Wargaming predicted that U.S. aircraft would only require one fighter wing to infiltrate most Chinese airspace, even with low degrees of stealth. China, on the other hand, has made significant headway into this field since 2000, blanketing the majority of the nation with an intricate web of air defense radars, missiles, and artillery weapons. The only issue is that they are still Soviet hand-me-downs, although newer ones. The tip of the spear for China's air defense system is the legacy Soviet S-300 and its Chinese clone, the HQ-9. China has thousands of launchers, both purchased and domestically manufactured, that they have put along the coast and interior to adequately protect most of its military installations. But there is just one problem. The S-300, despite being touted as such a mythical boogeyman in the media, is a very antiquated and poorly designed system, no matter what upgrades China makes to it. The S-300 has never been tested in combat, but its most critical test from 2006 proves just how bad it is. During this test, the Russian government wanted to see what the system could do. The Russian army launched 30 missiles at it over many months, and the S-300 was unable to shoot any of them down. This is even though the missiles the S-300 had to shoot down were older, slower missiles that flew in a straight path. Even this was too much for the Soviet system to manage. While China has acquired several batteries from Russia's S-400 system, these are insufficient to have a significant impact. Furthermore, the effectiveness of this armament system is being questioned. Because of this, even though China has a very deep air defense network, it is not particularly sophisticated and can only warn Chinese forces that they are going to get bombed by American planes with no capacity to shoot them down. Part of the reason China can't take down U.S. planes is America's massive superiority in stealth bombers. The United States now has 20 B-2 stealth bombers in service, whereas China has none, and will most likely have none for the next 10 years. The B-2 bomber represents the peak of American aviation technology. With its sleek design, composite materials, and other top-secret technologies, the aircraft can fly at a ceiling of 50,000 feet and have a range of almost 7,000 nautical miles on one tank of gas. The plane is an absolute beast, and its combat record speaks for itself. Seeing combat in the Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya, the plane is combat tested and stands in a club of its own as the only true stealth bomber in operational service. But what makes China so scared of it is that no matter how much it increases its vast missile inventory, it will never develop a missile system capable of striking the stealth bomber's home bases. That is because most of the time, the aircraft have operated on the opposite side of the globe from where the target locations have been. For example, during the wars in the Balkans and Iraq, most of the flights flew out of Missouri or the United Kingdom. Guam and Diego Garcia, an isolated island in the Indian Ocean, also routinely hosted combat operations. Despite how fantastic the B-2 is, the Air Force is also hard at work on a new and better stealth bomber known as the B-21 Raider. The first completely working model was presented in 2022 after being under development for the majority of the previous decade. While it may not appear to be much different on the surface, the avionics and computer systems within, as well as the aircraft's secret coatings, have been enhanced to the point that no present or proposed air defense system can hit it. The Air Force plans to have roughly 100 of these bombers in service by the mid-2030s, with the first flight scheduled for later in 2023. So, because of this, by the time China might start to conduct test flights on its own indigenous H-20 stealth bomber, the U.S. will have 100 bombers that are even better than the B-2. The strategic implications of this are huge and mean that the U.S. can cripple China's air defense network, command and control, and airfields without China being able to do anything about it. Along those same lines of not having stealth bombers, the U.S. Air Force possesses two unique capabilities that China could only dream of having. The first of these is aerial refueling. Remember just a moment ago when we talked about how the B-2 could bomb targets from Missouri? That was only possible because of aerial in-flight refueling. This evolution, much like the Navy's underway replenishment, while seemingly mundane and boring, is a tactical skill that has strategic-level impacts. For decades, the Air Force has been the premier force in the art of aerial refueling. Every type of aircraft can do it. Fighters, bombers, cargo planes, and everything in between conduct this maneuver on a routine basis. The stars of these evolutions are the KC-135 Stratotankers and the KC-10 Extender. The newest model, the KC-46 Pegasus, also carries out this mission as it comes online and replaces aging aircraft that face retirement. Because of this, the U.S. has almost 90% of the entire world's tanker inventory. While seemingly mundane, this has a huge impact. The most obvious impact is that this capability extends the range of every type of U.S. aircraft. This has second and third order effects, such as keeping air bases out of harm's way and allowing aircraft more time on target. China, on the other hand, now has just a few dozen tankers in its inventory, compared to the US's over 500, and the majority of them are outdated Soviet jets. China has stated that it will construct a larger, better tanker fleet, although this is improbable. As a result, most Chinese pilots are unable to do aerial refueling. This means that they are limited by the operating capabilities of their aircraft and require bases to refuel them. Because of this limitation, Chinese pilots must return to base sooner and cover a shorter distance than their American counterparts. Additionally, because Chinese pilots cannot aerially refuel anywhere near the capacity U.S. forces can, taking out their air bases from either stealth bombers or standoff weapons would have a huge impact on their operational capability. If Chinese planes cannot refuel close enough to the fight, the Chinese military would lose air superiority simply because its planes would run out of gas before getting into action. And unfortunately for China, they would need all the fighter support they could get in a war with the U.S. because of another asset that would be completely dominating the battlefield. The A-10 Thunderbolt, colloquially known as the Warthog. The A-10 Thunderbolt is without a doubt the greatest ground attack aircraft in service now, if not all time. The plane has been in service for almost 50 years and will continue to be used for several decades to come for a solid reason. Its combat record speaks for itself. The A-10, which first saw action in the Gulf War, has been a cornerstone of American military operations for the past 30 years. The A-10 is the most combat-proven, close-air support aircraft in the sky today, having destroyed several tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery systems. While there has been talk throughout the years to retire this aircraft, its performance has been too good to do so, and the U.S. has opted to renewing the remaining fleet to keep them airworthy. In a strongly contested situation, the A-10 may not have had the finest onboard countermeasures and defense systems. The plane's detractors must comprehend that these planes would not be sent in alone, and certainly not without first preparing the fighting zone by suppressing the opponent's air defense. Because the Chinese air bases are likely to be destroyed early in a fight with the U.S., the Chinese would most likely lose the capacity to provide consistent air support for their soldiers. When combined with better aircraft destroying their air defenses, this would create an ideal hunting ground for the Warthog, allowing the aircraft to slaughter Chinese ground forces. As a whole, China is scared of the U.S. Air Force for a variety of reasons. The United States Air Force has a huge technical edge over China, and its long-range attack capabilities can penetrate far into Chinese territory. Furthermore, the U.S. Air Force has a long history of combat success, and China has no doubt witnessed the devastation that U.S. air power can cause. Of course, China is not sitting back and doing nothing. It is strongly investing in its Air Force and developing new weapon systems capable of challenging the U.S. Air Force. However, it is apparent that China continues to regard the U.S. Air Force as a danger and is taking measures to offset that threat. And that brings us to the end of today's video. We sincerely appreciate you spending time out of your busy day to hang out with us today, and we'll look forward to catching up with you in our next video. Please don't forget to like and share our video with like-minded individuals who will enjoy this one as we hope that you did. And make sure you subscribe to our channel for more great content from us. Have a great day, and thank you for watching.